Hello, it's Wendy Passmore here again, and we're going to continue our thoughts and reflections on the message that Francis of Assisi continues to bring us today. I shared the first part of this series, his life and his story, some of his background, and now we're going to move into some of the themes that arise from his life and his message. So the first is creation, and many of us have experienced in gardens Francis and the bird baths and his absolute love of nature and the animals and the trees. And even it's told that he was walking down the path and a worm was going across in front of him, and he bent down and said, "Brother worm, this is a dangerous place for you to be," and moved the worm over into the side of the grass. So he just had an awesome respect for every created thing, and that includes people. So where does all this come from, I wonder, and how did he come to this revelation? He certainly studied scripture, and when it talks about in Genesis the creation stories, and it ended that and what God created was good, and all the elements of earth and the world created by God, the creator, creation, the creator, and declaring it was good. So one of the first things that it seemed come to Francis was the church had it wrong. In his day, it was a time of indulgences. People were heavily laden with sin and they need to pay their way out of the sinful state that they found themselves in. And Francis was often considered a loyal dissident. And this is one of the theological stances that he took great umbrage to. He said, what God created is good. Creation was created in goodness. And this whole sense that we're created in sin has no biblical foundation to it because and no reality to it. As he looked around at the hills of Assisi and the wonder of creation, he said, "Oh, it's good." And every person he encountered along the road, he bowed before the mystery of the creativity of God in that person, whether they were aware of it or not. He knew that they were created by a loving God. Um, so sin was an overlay, if you wanted to use that terminology, or wrongdoing or pain or brokenness in the world was not the initial intent of God's creativity. The underlying creativity of God is goodness, and that goodness resides in all of creation. And I know for me personally, encountering this Franciscan theology shifted forever in me my way of seeing the world, my way of seeing people I encounter. That within me, as I encounter people, whether it be in a restaurant or in a pub or walking in a park, not that we can do that right now in this pandemic time, but is that inner sense, wow, there's another beautiful creation of God. Now you might not know that you are, but you are. And I know that. So I can sit with you and just enjoy the creativity of who you are because you're unique, and there's no other person like you on earth. And just to sit before the beauty of the creativity of God in every person we meet and every creature we encounter, maybe our dogs, our animals. Um, so for me, that was a life-changing revelation, and I'm just so grateful for Francis being so strong about that. And he was coming up against the whole church because the Roman Catholic Church was the only game in town, and so that's what you had to be affiliated with, and or you'd be considered a heretic and burned at the stake or something. So, but he stood on the edges of all of that and proclaimed something very different, and it was just such a welcome relief for people to hear this good news that I'm good, that I was created in goodness, and that I was created in love, and that there's no other person like me. And my job is just to become who I've been called to be and who I've been created to be. And in that line, I'm going to read a story from Murray Bodo, who's a beautiful Franciscan friar who has spent his life studying Francis and his time in the world and all the messages that Francis wanted to bring to those who would hear. And this is one of the stories from his book called Francis, The Journey and the Dream, is the book title, and it's Murray Bodo. And this particular one is called The Mountain Jonquil, and it really illustrates the heart in many ways of Francis. Francis was concerned for those who had never made the journey inward. They were all around him. You knew them by their sensitivity, for they were as insensitive as the outer self is compared to the inner. And what was saddest to him was the worry and concern of those who never descended far enough into themselves to find that serene center where they would meet and listen to the other. Because they never went deep enough, they found only themselves, and in that meeting they began to worry about their lives and their future and what they would leave behind for others to remember. In short, they saw only their mortality and were frightened by the brevity and seeming futility of living, then passing on, in time forgotten by everyone. He was thinking about all these people one day as he stood atop Mount Sebacio, gazing upon the breathtaking panorama of Assisi and the whole valley of Spoleto below him. He looked down and saw a tiny jonquil, which is like a little daffodil flower, looking up at him. And he forgot the majesty of mountains and valleys in concentrating on the delicate, trembling beauty of this single mountain flower. It stood there in the freedom of the mountain air, glorifying God. Its life, so brief and vulnerable, was an act of praise, as everyone's life should be. It did not worry about what it would accomplish in life or leave behind, nor did it fear its own brief existence. It simply was. That was the secret amid the mystery of the hermitage on Mount Sebacio. All was serene and peaceful on that wild and precarious mountainside, because everything merely was. No tree had to justify its being there by working harder than the other trees. It simply grew with its own inner life and rhythm and lifted its branches to the sky. The little flower at Francis's feet felt no jealousy that Francis was taller and could move at will while it was rooted in the one spot in the ground for all its life. Why then did people strive to be what they were not and count their own worth in terms of their success. Francis wished that all people were inner people so they could look at this jonquil and see themselves. There's so many lessons we can lift out of this little story of the mountain jonquil. For me, one is just to be comfortable in who I am, because that is who I'm meant to be, and to find my way into that grounded center, like the mountain jonquil was just grounded in that place and just was what it was. And for me to find myself grounded in the place of just being what I am and just offering that to God, like the mountain jonquil offered the beautiful flower that it was to God and to the world around it. So that's a wonderful lesson that goes deeper than Francis and the bird baths. And although it is beautiful, because there's times when Francis was known to preach to the birds, and there was a time when he was sharing some stories about Jesus to this group that had gathered, and these birds actually in the trees were making a lot of noise and disturbing what he was trying to share. And he said, okay, brother and sister birds, let's just be quiet here for a while. He just spoke to them while I finish. And the story is it's probably a legend or whatever, but they seemed to quieten down, and so he was able to carry on with his message. So the message that Francis brings to the world today, I think, is so profound and inspiring, that we are all interconnected. And as we're in the midst of this pandemic and people have taken a pause and the earth is seemingly recovering, and taking some new breaths as well, that Francis would be encouraging us all to be very aware of the earth and the beauty of creation, and that we're called to be part of it, to see ourselves as interconnected, and how we're so dependent on the air to breathe, and on the trees for oxygen, and on the animals to bring joy into our lives. And so it's really a time of reflection on creation, on the earth, how we're caring for the earth, how we're called to care for the earth. A time of really seeing the creativity of God in each other and of all the people in the world, regardless of race, religious strife, whatever spiritual path people are on. All is created by this loving God who yearns to have relationship of love and affirmation to all of creation, that we can celebrate and be joyous as Francis was. And so on his deathbed, he wrote this, he wrote what I'm going to share with you now, called the Canticle of Brother Sun. And he would personify the elements around him, like Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Sister Rabbit. So I'm going to read that to you now. So he was about 2 days or 1 day out from actually dying when he wrote this reflection. Most high, omnipotent, good Lord, yours are the praises, the honor, and all blessing. To you alone, most high, do they belong, and no person worthy to mention you. Praise be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially Sir Brother Sun, who makes the day and through whom you give us light, and he is beautiful and radiant with great splendor, and bears the signification of you, Most High. Praise be to you, my Lord, for Sister Moon and the stars. You have formed them in heaven, clear and precious and beautiful. Praise be you, my Lord, for Brother Wind and for the air, cloudy and serene, and every kind of weather, by which you give sustenance to your creatures. Praise be you, my Lord, for Sister Water, which is very useful and humble and precious and chaste. Praise be you, my Lord, for Brother Fire, by whom you illume the night, and he is beautiful and cheerful and robust and strong. Praise be you, my Lord, for our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us and produces various fruits with colored flowers and herbs. He had such a connection and understanding of nature and all the elements. And these four elements remind us of our native brothers and sisters who are so connected in the same way to creation and Mother Earth. So there's a universal truth being expressed if we can only access it and embrace it in our own lives. So as a prayer, Francis would encourage us to go out into nature and just to find something that speaks to you. Perhaps it would be a rock. And Francis would say, Brother Rock, you've been here long before I came to Earth, and you're going to be here long after I leave this Earth. So thank you, Brother Rock, for reminding me that that God is ever present and everlasting. Or the same rock could speak in such a way as saying, Brother Rock, you're reminding me of a hardness in my heart that I really need to look at. And I thank you for reminding me of this hard place in my heart that I need to pray for grace to have softened and to be open. So I encourage us as I leave this time to go out into nature as we're out for our walk and just find something that grabs your attention and see how it might speak to you. So until next time, bye-bye.